I stopped telling people my birthday years ago, not out of secrecy, but because it never made much difference. The photo found me. I hadn't searched for it. Emily's page was public, or maybe it wasn't, and the algorithm didn't care. She stood beside Vanessa, both of them polished in the way women get when they know people are watching. The caption read, "Grateful to celebrate our amazing mom today, 65 and thriving." There were 2 candles burning on a cake with white frosting and gold piping. It sat in the center of the mahogany dining table I'd dusted for them the year they moved in. Behind it, the window drapes were open wide, letting in the light I hadn't seen in months. Vanessa held the knife. Garrett stood beside her, hand on her shoulder. I wasn't in the frame. I refreshed the page, thinking perhaps there was another photo. A wider one. A second post. There wasn't. I checked my calendar. No missed calls, no texts, no forgotten emails. The rug beneath my feet was thin, and the concrete floor pulled the heat from my heels through the soles of my socks. I reached for the kettle on the hot plate and turned the dial to medium. The cord sparked slightly in the wall socket. I leaned down to adjust the tape that held it steady. Steam rose reluctantly from the spout. The enamel was chipped, revealing the rust at its edge. My reflection in the dented silver toaster beside it looked as if it belonged to someone else. My phone buzzed once. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Need anything for the apartment?" I didn't reply. The word apartment scratched like sandpaper across the inside of my chest. I walked over to the small window above the workbench that had once been part of the garage's original purpose. The view was the alley bins, lined up like tired soldiers, the lids askew. A breeze carried in the faint sourness of last week's trash. On the shelf below the window sat the glass jar where I kept my spoons. 4 of them mismatched, salvaged from old sets. One had a floral pattern so worn it now looked like a bruise. When Garrett bought the property, he told me, "You'll love this, Mom. It's detached from the main house so you get your own space. Vanessa will help set things up." I remembered nodding. I always nodded. Space was the word he used. Not garage, not concrete, not one outlet for everything. The only picture in the room was one I'd taped beside the mirror Garrett at age 6 in a Halloween cape I'd sewn from an old black skirt. His hands were sticky with chocolate. His eyes were wide and unguarded. I didn't keep any recent photos of Vanessa. The tea had gone cold before I realized I hadn't poured it. I warmed it again and placed the mug on the small folding table next to my cot. The corner leg wobbled unless you pressed your foot against it just right. I sat. The blanket on the bed was thin and smelled faintly of bleach. There was a time I might have apologized for noticing that. The message came again, this time with a photo attachment. Another cake. Another angle. I could see more clearly now Vanessa had written "Happy Birthday, Mom" in icing. I stared at that word for a long time. Not Lois, not Mrs. Whitlow, just Mom, as if I had been there, as if I had smiled, as if my name had been called even once. The phone buzzed again. "Vanessa's planning a little gathering later this week. Want me to ask if you should come by?" There was no punctuation, no warmth, not even a pretense of asking how I'd spent the day. I stood and pulled the cardigan from the hook near the heater. It was unraveling at the cuffs, a thread hanging like a loose nerve. I pulled it gently, let it coil between my fingers, then let go. I walked to the door and opened it, not to go out, just to let air in. The light spilled in sideways, catching on the oil stain near the corner. I'd tried scrubbing that spot more than once. It never faded. They called this a mother-in-law suite when they listed it. I remembered Vanessa saying, "Most women your age don't mind simple living, less to fuss over." I hadn't corrected her. I'd smiled, taken the key, and carried the last box in myself. From across the alley, a car door slammed. I stepped back inside and closed the door slowly. No one had ever said I wasn't invited. That's the trick of erasure. It doesn't need words. Just silence. Just absence. I looked again at the screen. One final photo had been added. Vanessa was tagged. So was Emily. So was Garrett. My name was not. The cake was lit. The room was full, and I was not there. I placed the phone face down on the table and covered it with a napkin. There was nothing else to do. Not tonight. Not anymore. Some people stop explaining because they've been heard. Others stop because they've been practiced into silence. I used to fold the napkins into triangles, then press each one under the heel of my palm to keep the crease sharp. Cotton holds a memory if you guide it firmly enough. That's what I told myself anyway. The first time I cleaned Garrett's house, Vanessa handed me a pair of gloves and said, "Try not to move the picture frames. They're leveled to light." I nodded, tucked the gloves into my purse, and cleaned barehanded. I wasn't there to touch her things, just to wipe around them. Once a month I'd come when the house was quiet. Emily was often out Garrett in meetings. I'd dust the ceiling fans, clean the stovetop until the stainless shone, empty their bins into black bags I brought from home. I did it quietly, like a ritual, like I owed them cleanliness for all the space I took up by existing. No one asked me to. But it helped Garrett save on hiring a service, and Vanessa said, "It makes you feel useful, right?" I had smiled then. That old soft smile I used when I didn't have the words for what something really meant. On holidays, I stayed on the edge of the gatherings. Not because I preferred it. I learned over time where not to stand. The hallway between the kitchen and the formal dining room was too visible. The living room couch was always already spoken for. The back patio, though, that was safe. One Easter, I brought a tray of deviled eggs garnished with sweet paprika and a sprig of parsley in each. Vanessa met me at the door and said, "Oh, we've already got those, but thanks." She took the tray and disappeared into the kitchen. I didn't see the eggs again. During her promotion dinner last spring, Garrett raised a glass and said, "Vanessa is the sharpest person I've ever known. Honestly, she should have been the oldest." Everyone laughed. I laughed too after a second. Later that evening, I sat near the coat rack beside the door while the others clinked glasses in the dining room. My seat was metal. It clicked when I shifted. No one noticed. Or if they did, they were kind enough not to show it. Garrett once pulled me aside after a Sunday lunch and placed his hand on my shoulder briefly. "Mom, don't take it personally if you're not always in the center of things. You know how fast-paced everything is now." I nodded. He walked away before I could answer, which made it easier. I stopped bringing casseroles to family dinners after Vanessa said, "We're going a bit more contemporary with the menu now." She held my dish with 2 fingers and passed it to a caterer. "Don't worry, we'll heat it later." Later never came. Christmas was easier when I started buying small gifts for myself and labeling them from Garrett and Vanessa, just so the neighbors wouldn't wonder why I was never carrying anything back. One year, I wrapped a scarf I'd found at a thrift store and tucked a card inside. To Mom. "Thanks for all you do." I still have that card. The handwriting is mine, but the message felt real when I read it back. I remember one Thanksgiving I cooked the entire meal: turkey, sweet potatoes with marshmallows, green bean casserole, cornbread. I arrived early, set the table, checked every fork for smudges. When it was time to eat, Vanessa gestured toward the chair by the dishwasher. "You don't mind, right? You're closer to the kitchen that way." I told her I didn't. The machine started its rinse cycle halfway through the meal. I smiled and passed the gravy boat. My back started giving out not long after that. I'd bend down to pick up the grocery bags Garrett asked me to carry to the guest pantry, and it would seize like a locked hinge. One night after folding towels for their upstairs linen closet, I leaned against the banister to catch my breath. Garrett walked by and said, Try not to overdo it, Mom. You know how delicate your generation gets. I didn't tell them when I had to sleep on the floor for a week because I couldn't lie down without pain. Instead, I learned how to get by propped up on pillows in the corner of the garage. I told Garrett everything was fine. Vanessa didn't ask. There's a birthday card tucked in the drawer by the utility sink. I wrote it to myself 2 years ago when I thought there might be a surprise. I found a pale blue envelope, added a pressed pansy from the garden behind the old house, and wrote in careful cursive, "To Mom, your grace holds us together." The card never left the drawer. I used to think that if I did everything right, showed up on time, stayed quiet when dismissed, folded things just so they would remember who I was, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, something like love, or at least recognition. Vanessa once turned to me in the kitchen while arranging flowers for a brunch and said, "You know, some people just have a presence. You can feel when they walk in. Others, well, they're gentler, quieter, background types." I wiped the counter and nodded, thinking maybe background was still part of the picture. Now I wonder if you stay quiet long enough, people begin to think you have nothing to say. The napkins were always folded perfectly. Every corner tucked in every crease, sharp. But no one ever unfolded them at the table I set. They always used the paper ones. Easier to throw away. Cleaner. And maybe I made that too easy. I don't fold napkins anymore. I eat on a tray, balanced on my knees. The silverware isn't matched, but it's mine. And I don't press anything flat these days. Some things are better left with their creases. People assume forgetting is passive. I've found it's often deliberate who gets remembered, who gets folded out of the picture. The wedding invitation came in a thick ivory envelope, the kind with a wax seal that leaves a faint red ring when held too tightly. It was addressed to the Whitlow family. No name, no title. Just the whole of us, as if we were interchangeable parts of a unit that moved neatly in one direction. I opened it with a paring knife and set the envelope aside. It didn't feel like mine. At the reception, I was seated next to the kitchen doors. Every time the servers pushed through, the smell of garlic and steam swept across the table. The woman next to me wore a brooch shaped like a starfish and asked if I was from the groom's side or the bride's. I said, "I'm the mother," and she nodded as if that clarified nothing. Later, Garrett clinked his glass and made a toast about family. He raised his flute and said, "To the women who've shaped us, my wife, of course, and Vanessa, my rock." He glanced past me. I smiled anyway, not out of reflex, just muscle memory. Vanessa once told a group of her friends, "My mom doesn't like parties. She gets overwhelmed." I was sitting on the other side of the patio wall waiting for someone to ask if I needed a plate. No one did. There's a box under my cot. It holds cards from holidays mostly unsigned or printed. To the Whitlows in gold foil. Season's greetings to all. Never a handwritten name. I used to look for my own in the scribbles, just one Lois tucked in a corner. I stopped checking after the 4th year. I remember Garrett bringing a new co-worker over once. The man wore a blazer with suede elbows and offered me his coat at the door. Garrett put a hand on the man's back and said, "This is Lois. She keeps the place running." The man smiled and whispered, "Ah, the housekeeper." Garrett didn't correct him. There was a folded blanket I kept on the guest chair. The corner was torn, but the rest still held warmth. I brought it when Vanessa invited friends over for brunch, in case someone needed extra seating. She glanced at it and said, "Maybe leave that in the garage. Our aesthetic is more curated now." One Thanksgiving, I asked if they needed help setting the table. Vanessa handed me a bag of plastic utensils and said, "We're going more casual this year." I folded each fork and knife into napkins anyway. No one used them. There's a chair I used to sit in by the laundry machines. One leg cracked 2 winters ago. Garrett asked if I wanted to replace it. I said it still works fine. It leaned to the left, and I learned to adjust. Once, when a package came addressed to Ms. Lois Whitlow, the delivery man read my name aloud with a slight smile. I hadn't heard it spoken by someone who wasn't in customer service in months. He said, "You must be the lady of the house." I didn't answer. I signed the receipt with the pen I kept in my apron pocket. During Vanessa's baby shower, the family portrait was taken in front of the mantel. Garrett stood behind Emily, arms resting on her shoulders. Vanessa stood on the other side, one hand on the chair. The photographer asked Mom in the middle. Vanessa touched her stomach and said, "We want the focus here." No one asked twice. I stood off frame holding a tray of cucumber sandwiches that no one touched. I offered one to the caterer before taking the rest home. Once Garrett emailed a group invitation to an anniversary dinner. I clicked the link and read, "For our closest friends and family." The list of recipients showed 11 addresses. Mine was labeled Other. I replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. It felt polite. After that, I started keeping stamps in the drawer. It gave me the illusion of correspondence. I never sent anything. I remember sitting on the porch one summer watching Vanessa's car back out of the driveway. She hadn't come in, just dropped off an envelope with no note, only instructions written in sharp black ink. Sign these and leave them inside the mailbox. I signed without reading. I trusted her. Or maybe I trusted that being useful might mean being remembered. The ring I wear on my left hand is from a Christmas market, not my marriage. My original band doesn't fit anymore, and I never had it resized. This one cost $7 and has a stone that flakes near the edge. I twist it when I wait too long for someone to answer the phone. It's been getting more rotation lately. Garrett once joked, "You're like a whisper in the background, always. They're never too loud." He said it while sipping wine, his tie loose, Vanessa laughing in another room. I nodded. I thought maybe it was a kind of praise. The mailbox outside the garage door is rusted. I check it daily, mostly bills. One flyer, a church newsletter addressed to current resident. Sometimes I wish for junk mail with my name on it. Even junk wants you to notice it. The last time someone knocked at the garage door, I jumped. It was a girl selling magazine subscriptions for a fundraiser. She asked, "Is your mom home?" I told her no. I kept the card she left anyway. Somewhere along the way, I stopped leaving shoes by the mat. No one tracked in dirt. No one stayed long enough to need the gesture. I used to think absence was something you could feel like a draft. But I've learned it's quieter than that. It's the sound of your name not being spoken when it should. It's a chair being filled by someone else and no one noticing the switch. It's the envelope arriving without you in it and still being expected to smile at the stamp. Some people smile while cutting away what no longer serves them. Others do it slowly, calling it compromise. Vanessa's text came late in the morning. "Stop by tonight if you're free." Nothing formal, no time, no address. Just that vague tone that leaves no room for confirmation. I ironed the good blouse again. The neckline had gone loose, the seams beneath the arms threatened to give. The flats were worn, but they didn't squeak. I didn't bring wine. I'd brought wine last time and left with it unopened, forgotten beneath the coat rack. Inside, the house was dressed like a magazine page. New wallpaper, dim lights warming every surface. There were unfamiliar shoes at the door, patent leather suede. Someone's dog barked from the backyard. I stood for a while, long enough for no one to notice. Then Garrett appeared, all cufflinks and polished vowels. There she is, my mother, the woman who made me. His arm grazed my shoulder, a few polite chuckles from a couch I wasn't invited to sit on. He leaned in, voice softer than the music. "Mom, how's the apartment? Still liking your little nest." My throat didn't tighten. My fingers didn't clench. I just said it. "I live in the garage, Garrett." His smile paused, uncertain whether to recover or retreat. Then Emily dropped her glass. It didn't shatter, but it cracked, spreading veins through the stem like something dying inside. No one moved. Garrett blinked at me slowly, as if expecting a different version of my voice to arrive and fix it. "You mean the garage?" "Yes. The one with the paint cans still labeled basement gray. The one with the cold patch under the cot. The one where the overhead light buzzes and flickers before it settles." Vanessa walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a linen towel. "It's a self-contained unit," she said, calm, like she was answering a hotel guest. "It has its own entrance heat storage. It's private." Garrett looked at her. "You told me she was in the main house. I told you she was taken care of. That's not the same." Vanessa's shoulders squared. She didn't object. I turned slightly. No one asked. Garrett's voice lowered. "You never said anything. You never looked." I saw it then, the moment his picture of me cracked. Not out of cruelty, but absence. He thought I lived inside the big house because he'd never walked far enough down the hallway to find out. Emily knelt to clean the glass. She moved slowly, deliberately, like someone used to navigating broken things. Vanessa crossed her arms. "She has power water, a toaster oven, a curtain. It's cozy." Garrett's voice was quiet now. "The security bills go to the house." "Correct. I pay for all of it." "Yes. But she lives in a garage. It's attached." "We never said where she'd sleep." There were family photos on the side table, one from last Christmas. My hand was cropped at the edge of the frame. I remember standing behind the camera. "She has a heater," Vanessa added. "One I bought for the nursery. You said it wasn't safe to use. It's fine for short-term stays. She lives there." I sat in a narrow chair near the entry. One leg rocked slightly every time I shifted. Vanessa's tone dropped. "Be careful with that one, Mom. It's fragile." Garrett turned away from her. His jaw tensed, but his voice didn't rise. "You never showed me. You said everything was handled." "It was." "No, it wasn't." He looked at the wine stain on the rug. The red spread like a slow bloom, beautiful and careless. "She's my mother." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was precise, measured, clean. Vanessa's voice was flat. "I did the best I could." That was when I saw it clearly, not neglect, not misunderstanding. Delegation. A rearrangement of obligations repackaged as generosity. I watched Garrett process it, folding in on himself like something quietly ashamed. Vanessa kept going. "She never said she was unhappy. She didn't have to. She eats, she sleeps, she has keys. What else is missing?" "A chair that isn't borrowed. A room where the light doesn't hum. A plate that matches the others." I rubbed the knuckle of my thumb. The skin there always cracked in winter. I remembered taping a hot pack to my lower back last month. The heater had gone out. I hadn't mentioned it. Garrett sat beside me, not too close. "I thought you were okay." "I know. You're not. I wasn't." He shook his head. Why didn't I notice I didn't answer? It wasn't a question that needed answering. Vanessa stood near the table, still holding the towel. "You could have said something, Lois. You made it dramatic by staying quiet." I looked at the wine on the floor. It had begun to dry at the edges. Garrett rose. He didn't look at either of us. "I need to think." Vanessa didn't stop him. The chair wobbled again when I shifted. I steadied it with the side of my shoe. The ring on my hand had spun inward, the stone now pressed against my palm. No one offered me dinner. No one filled my glass. The chandelier flickered once, then steadied. And I thought, if you package a box well enough, no one asks what's missing inside. Some things become lighter after you stop asking them to be held. The tote was the same one I'd used to carry oranges back from the Sunday market. The bottom still smelled faintly like citrus and fabric softener. I folded it flat, then opened it again just to test the strength of the seams. They held. There wasn't much to pack. A scarf I'd knitted the winter after my mother died, uneven but warm. The mug with the blue sparrow near the handle. A pair of gloves with stitching undone on the right thumb. 3 envelopes I'd never mailed with no return address. I tucked them into the inside pocket behind a small zippered pouch where I kept my pension receipt. That was enough. The heater's cord curled like a sleeping animal. I unplugged it, wound it carefully, and placed it in the basket next to the cot. One last check of the mirror smudged faintly in the corner where I had once tried to wipe away steam after boiling water for instant oats. The key clicked gently as I removed it from the hook. I didn't place it in an envelope. I didn't tape it to a note. I just let it hang there like a comma left behind mid-thought. My shoes scraped lightly on the concrete. I'd worn the soles down over the years walking back and forth to the main house for dinners I wasn't meant to stay long at. Garrett always texted after, "Thanks for helping with the dishes, Mom." Never thanks for coming. I wrapped the scarf around my neck. Not tightly, just enough to remember what warmth felt like when it wasn't dependent on someone else's permission. Emily once left a note taped to the garage door. "Please don't rearrange the bins. The system works for us." That was when I'd tried to make more space for walking after tripping on a bag of golf clubs left by the water heater. I'd put them against the wall out of the way. They were returned the next morning. No word, just that note. The mug had a small chip now. I hadn't dropped it. Vanessa had the one time she came to tell me about their vacation plans. She didn't notice the chip. She drank her coffee and left the mug unwashed. "Makes people uncomfortable when you're always hovering," she once said. "You don't mean to, but it's a lot." I had nodded. I didn't hover. I stayed out of the living room. I never turned on the lights in the hallway. I only used the washer during daytime hours. I spoke in quiet tones on the phone with the door closed. But still, it was a lot. I brewed tea that last morning, the last of the lemon ginger packets. I poured it into the chipped mug and held it until it cooled. I left it untouched on the shelf where the light hit it around 10 each morning. I imagined it glowing like something sacred, even if just for a few minutes a day. Garrett's message came after sunrise. "Mom, are you okay?" 3 words. I stared at them until the screen dimmed. Then I wrote, "Thank you for everything. I think it's time you let someone else manage me." I placed the phone face down. He didn't call. I folded the cot blanket in thirds, laid it neatly on the plastic bin where I kept spare batteries, old letters, church programs. I didn't take those. Some things only make sense where they were left. The bus stop was quiet. A man stood beside me eating a banana and talking into his earbuds. I couldn't hear the other voice. He looked over once, nodded. I nodded back. He finished the banana, placed the peel carefully in a small grocery bag he had tied to his wrist. "I'm going back home," he said to no one. I said nothing. The tote sat on my lap, steady. I had removed the small church pin I used to wear on my coat lapel. Not because I'd lost faith, but because it no longer needed broadcasting. The woman sitting across from me asked where I was headed. I said Betty. Just the name. She smiled. No further questions. Betty had written me a letter once years ago when we were both widowed the same spring. "It's strange," she wrote, "how quickly people forget the color of the chair you always sat in." I kept that letter in my dresser drawer for a long time. I closed my eyes when the bus crossed the bridge. I didn't sleep. I thought about the curtain I'd pinned over the garage door. It always sagged. The light would peek through in the mornings. Sometimes I stared at that strip of light, imagining it was a doorway. I never walked through it. Until now. Emily told Garrett I was difficult. That's what I overheard once after they thought I had gone back outside. "She doesn't push back," Garrett said. "She just..." absorbs everything, as though that made me harder to deal with. Absorbing becomes heaviness. He never understood that. I had let Garrett believe the garage was temporary. I had let them believe I was grateful. I had let silence become proof that I was fine. I wasn't fine. I was finished. The scarf slipped slightly when I stood to get off the bus. I adjusted it without thinking, the way you fix a child's collar on picture day, out of habit, not hope. No one was there to meet me. That was the point. I didn't send a final letter. I didn't call to explain. The door never slammed. It closed and stayed closed. I no longer woke to footsteps overhead. No blender at 6 a.m. No phone ringing in another room. No voice saying, "She's still sleeping. Just let her be." Only a breeze through the screen window and a faint creak from the trees when the wind pressed into them. The room was smaller than the garage, but quieter in a way that didn't feel like exile. The walls were paneled with faded pine, uneven in spots, and the floor slanted slightly where the boards had bowed with time. There was a folding bed pushed against the left wall, a chipped dresser with one drawer that stuck, and a curtain that didn't quite meet in the middle. I kept a folded towel wedged at the base of the door, not because I expected anyone, but because the habit of guarding the edge of my space hadn't quite left me. Betty's seed shop opened at 9. Sometimes she knocked before then, sometimes she didn't. I liked it better when she didn't. It meant I could move at my own pace. One morning, I rearranged the mugs in the small shelf by color, then put them back the way they were. I told myself it mattered. A cup I bought at the flea market had a hairline crack down its side, thin as a vein. I used it anyway. The tea didn't spill. I drank it slowly at the window. Outside, the maple tree leaned slightly to the left as though trying to hear something better. The leaves were the color of burnt copper, not the green I remembered from a childhood I hadn't revisited in years. Betty had offered me the space behind the shop 2 years ago as a joke more than anything. "If the city ever becomes too much, come hide out in my dirt and seeds." I'd laughed then. She hadn't repeated the offer when I arrived. She just cleared the clutter and set a tin of oatmeal on the shelf. I folded my own laundry. I marked the calendar with small pencil dots. No labels, just dots. I swept the corners where dust tried to settle in again. I answered no one. A letter arrived with my name printed too neatly to be Garrett's handwriting. Inside, an invoice for the garage's utility usage forwarded from the house address. I tore it into 4 equal pieces and tucked it under the cracked cup, a paperweight for something that no longer needed anchoring. At night, I wore the same wool sweater with thinning sleeves, the one I'd once worn to Clayton's school recital, a thread pulled loose at the elbow. I didn't sew it back. The fray sat quietly with me. No one asked me where I'd gone. That was the part I hadn't anticipated. Not the silence I'd lived with that for years, but the smoothness of absence. No phone call to ask why I'd left. No knock on the garage door, just a shifting in their lives that didn't make room for the shape of mine. Garrett didn't mean to, Betty had said once while drying her hands on a flour sack towel. Boys just lean on what's easy. She didn't mean it cruelly, but the word easy hung in the air long after the conversation ended, as if I had been the path of least resistance, as if my erasure was effortless. The radio in the shop played softly during the afternoons. Once, a segment about aging came on. A doctor spoke about cognitive decline. "Sometimes people forget their mothers," he said. I turned the volume down. I started walking in the evenings a little after 6. The sidewalks here cracked differently than the city's wider splits, grass pushing up through every chance it got. I stopped once at a bench near the library and read the plaque, "In memory of Walter Ames. He loved the view." I didn't know Walter, but I sat beside him for a while. The air here wasn't cleaner, just quieter. No one tried to explain things away. No one narrated my life for me. I didn't have to perform usefulness or gratitude. I didn't have to wear shoes if I didn't want to. A child came into the shop one afternoon and pointed at the bell tied to the back door. "Why doesn't it ring anymore?" Betty shrugged. "Maybe it's tired." I smiled, though I wasn't part of the exchange. I liked the idea of a bell that simply stopped. No crash, no fall, just silence. The first time I laughed here, it was quiet, more breath than sound. It happened while sorting seed packets alphabetically and realizing someone had put zinnias under S. A small, harmless mistake. One that didn't require correcting, but I did anyway. A moth got in through the window crack and circled the lamp by my bed. I watched it for a long time. It never landed. Just hovered as if it couldn't decide if the light was worth the burn. I turned the lamp off. The tin mirror by the dresser showed my face in a slight ripple. Not young, not old in the way magazines define it, just present. My hair had flattened from the pillow, but I didn't smooth it. I traced the line near my chin, one that had deepened lately, and thought of the way light carves out hollows when it enters a room sideways. There were no meals with candles now, no toasts, no assigned seating or folded napkins. Just toast, sometimes overcooked. I placed the cracked mug on the windowsill the next morning. Light caught in the fracture like it was trying to escape. I watched it glow for a minute, then turned away. I didn't need to be remembered by anyone who'd forgotten how to see me. I never expected their silence to break before the week ended. The first message appeared while I was rinsing a chipped mug. No greeting, no punctuation. Just, "Mom, where are you? Vanessa's freaking out, call me." The screen dimmed again before I finished reading. I left it face down on the table and folded the towel twice before hanging it back with the hem aligned. By Thursday, the phone lit up every few hours. Garrett, then Vanessa, then Whitlow residents. The same names in different orders, like shuffling a deck of cards already marked. I didn't answer. Not because I was waiting for the right thing to be said, just because I already knew what wouldn't be. The email came next. Subject line RE Urgent. Brand narrative concerns. It opened with a line about how much they respected my independence, followed by bulleted points on consistency, public alignment, family image projected reach. I paused at the phrase, "It's critical we manage maternal optics." I closed the email and wiped the edge of the kettle with a cloth. The water had already boiled. I poured a cup of chamomile and drank it without sugar, even though I usually added half a spoon. Later that night, I opened the drawer beside the bed. Inside was a Ziploc of old photos. Most of them were from holidays: Garrett with a snow shovel, Vanessa at a bonfire, the children with matching mittens. I appeared in few of them. Sometimes a sleeve, a hand, the corner of my coat. I traced the edge of one photo where I was passing a tray in the background. No one was looking at me. By Saturday, they started using full names again. Garrett left a voicemail. "Lois, this is affecting more than you realize. People are asking questions. We need to clarify your status, not, 'Are you well?' Do you need anything, just status." Betty noticed the phone buzzing constantly. She handed me a ceramic bird she'd found at a thrift store and said, "Let it chirp somewhere else." I placed the phone in the pantry beside the dry rice. It still vibrated through the door. The next morning, I let one call through. I didn't plan to. The sun hit the receiver, and I pressed it before thinking. Vanessa's voice filled the room before I could react. "You're making things unnecessarily complicated." Her tone was clipped, not upset, controlled. She didn't pause. "We're launching the Whitlow Wellness Initiative next week. There's media involved. Everyone assumes you're still with us. It's not good optics to be unaccounted for." I stared at the small tear on the couch cushion. I'd meant to sow it. I sent you a draft statement. All it needs is your approval. A few words about gratitude, home, generational continuity. That's all. We'll insert your quote beside the family crest. There was a breath not of hesitation, but of calculation. If this goes public, people might assume things. Misunderstandings can damage legacy. We've worked too hard to build this. I set the phone down and let her voice drift into the air like steam from the kettle. It faded. Later, I checked the file she'd emailed. A mock-up of a newsletter, holiday font, digital pine garlands, and a photo of the family around a fireplace. They had edited me in soft lighting, a mug and my handscarf over my shoulders. I didn't own that scarf. I wasn't in that room. The caption read, "Matriarch Lois Whitlow, still our light." The mug they chose had "Blessed" written on it. The following day, a courier brought flowers, lilies slightly wilted wrapped in plastic. No card, just a printed note. From all of us, come home soon. The envelope had been addressed to resident. They hadn't written my name. Garrett's next message was longer. He mentioned donor's reputation timing. Then at the end, "You've never been difficult before. Please don't start now." It wasn't meant to be cruel. That was what made it worse. I spent that afternoon cleaning the small window ledge. There was a smudge from my thumbprint. I polished it with an old sock. Around dusk, the phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with Vanessa's name. I didn't answer. A minute later, an email arrived. It read, "Let's not make this about ego, Mom. It's just logistics." Attached was a digitally rendered image of our house's front door, with a ribbon stretched across it. Promotional material for an article titled, "The Family That Gives Together." I zoomed in. My hand had been pasted in, resting on Garrett's back. At the bottom of the message was a sentence, "You were the one who always told us to do what's best for the family." I folded a napkin into a triangle, then unfolded it and folded it again the other way. The crease lines remained even after I smoothed them out. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the small notebook I kept tucked behind the dresser. It was mostly blank, except for a few clipped recipes and a shopping list from last fall. I wrote one line, "I was present." That should have been enough. Then I closed it. The next morning, Betty knocked before opening the door a crack. "They called here. I told them you weren't available." I nodded and kept knitting. The yarn didn't pull evenly, but the unevenness didn't matter. Not anymore. The phone buzzed again, but I didn't move. The screen glowed, then dimmed. They had finally noticed I was gone, but not because they missed me, because they needed me visible. I never realized how much space a person needs until no one is watching them. Not freedom in the grand sense, just room to move without tiptoeing. The first receipt I kept was for a pair of shoes. Beige, soft-soled, half a size up. They sat in the bottom of a plastic bag for 2 days before I wore them. The soles left no sound on Betty's wooden floors. I didn't tell anyone I bought them. There was no one to ask if they were necessary. The calendar in my room came from a community outreach table. I circled the 15th in green ink when my pension deposit arrived. Next to it in smaller print, I wrote, "Check blood pressure clinic." I liked the pen they gave me. It wrote evenly. That mattered more than I expected. Every morning I filled a yellow mug with water from the sink and poured it into the planter by the window. The petunias had started curling around the rim. I read somewhere they respond to music, but I only spoke to them when I forgot myself. A slip of paper on the fridge door said, "Rent due first. Call Doris." I hadn't met Doris when I moved in. She lived 2 doors down, ran the local book club, and wore scarves like armor. One day, she knocked, handed me a copy of The Secret Garden, and said, "Third Thursday. Bring your thoughts." I read slowly. I underlined nothing. But when they asked what I thought of the garden, I told them it wasn't really about the plants. It was about making something bloom even when no one believes you can. No one interrupted. That silence meant more than applause. Betty offered me a part-time shift at her store. I labeled the seed packets. Snapdragon's forget-me-nots creeping time. I liked the ones with names that didn't pretend to be grand. She let me open up in the mornings before customers. That was enough. One afternoon, I received an envelope from Garrett. My name on the front in a typeface I recognized from the holiday cards Vanessa used to order. Inside, a flyer for a charity event. The Whitlow Foundation presents A Legacy of Care. At the bottom, a note. Thought you'd like to come. We'll save you a seat by the fireplace. I tore it into 4 pieces and placed them in the compost bin behind Betty's shop. She didn't ask. Later that night, I wrote a grocery list that included strawberries, dental floss, and a new sponge. I stood in line behind a man buying lottery tickets and told the cashier to round up for the food bank donation jar. No one needed to know. I started using the electric kettle regularly. Not just for tea. Boiling water became a ritual. Pour, wait, steam against the cupboard glass. No one burst in, asking what I was doing. The silence stayed where I left it. A neighbor left a coat on my doorknob. Found this at the church. Drive her note read. Thought of you. It was navy with brass buttons. Slightly too big in the shoulders. I wore it the next morning walking to the post office. A teenager held the door open. I nodded. That was all. At the health clinic, I filled out a form with Lois Green written in black ink. I ticked boxes for allergies, medications, next of kin. I left the last one blank. The nurse didn't pause when reading it back. I appreciated that. Garrett sent another message. Just wondering if you'll reconsider. Vanessa says the donors will ask. I turned the phone face down on the windowsill and let it buzz. A moth landed on the glass. It stayed there until the light shifted. The chime above the shop door broke. I replaced it with a small bell I bought at a flea market. It rang lower, less sharp. Betty said nothing, but I noticed she didn't take it down. One Thursday evening, Doris read a poem about women who vanish without being noticed. We think they fade, she read, but they're just becoming too real to be seen by shallow eyes. I didn't speak after. I folded the paper in quarters and slipped it into my wallet. I don't miss the sound of dishes clattering during someone else's conversation. I don't miss the shadow of an apology I never received. I don't miss asking, is this a good time, before speaking in my own kitchen. The plant bloomed again, pale purple this time. I trimmed the brown leaves and wiped the window frame. The smell of soil reminded me of a time before birthday dinners were scheduled for publicity, a time before my name became a placeholder. Betty gave me a keychain with a single metal loop. You'll need somewhere to put your keys. I didn't tell her how long I'd waited to hear someone say your instead of the. Now, on my fridge, a magnet holds up a piece of paper I wrote last week. Just 6 words. I am learning how to stay. I haven't shown it to anyone. I don't plan to. They never did ask why I kept the hook empty. The one by the garage door. The one that used to hold the house key. I'd traced the outline of that key in my mind too many times. The metal wore down unevenly, always catching a little when turned. It fit loosely in the lock like it didn't belong anymore. Like me. I went to the post office early, before the town got noisy. The envelope was light, but I held it with both hands. 1 flat key inside. 1 sentence on a note card: I'm not coming back. Please don't send anyone after me. No return address. I asked the clerk to hand stamp it. That felt important for reasons I didn't explain. A week passed before Garrett found me. He came during a soft rain, the kind that doesn't soak you right away, just lingers. I heard his voice before I saw him. Lois Whitlow. Someone's here asking about flower care. I stood behind the counter gloves, damp from transplanting begonias. He looked out of place, creased slacks, a jacket too warm for the weather, and that hesitant half smile of a man expecting credit for showing up. I wasn't sure it was really you. This place doesn't seem like it is, I said. And it's enough. He paused. His eyes moved past the shelves of fertilizer, pausing on the tin cash box with the handwritten ledger. Mom, I didn't know. Vanessa. She told me everything was fine. No one asked me, I said, removing my gloves. When no one asks, everything always stays fine. He leaned against the counter, shifting his weight like it might change something. I thought you liked the garage space. She said you picked the colors, that you called it cozy. I looked past him. Betty had left a pot of tea on the back shelf, steam rising faintly. The chipped white mug I used every day sat nearby, still warm. I didn't decorate it. I insulated it. There's a difference. Garrett reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope sealed with a bank's logo. I transferred everything he said. Your accounts, the pension, the trust. It's under your name now, yours only. I didn't take it from him. He set it on the counter. It slid a little on the plastic mat. It's late, I said, but necessary. He exhaled slowly. I didn't mean for things to turn out like this. I thought we were helping. I thought letting Vanessa handle things would keep things simple. It was simple, I said, finally turning toward him. I lived in a garage. You visited a living room I wasn't in. You told people I was resting when I hadn't been invited. He looked like he wanted to disagree, but the words collapsed before they reached his mouth. I brought something else. He fumbled in his other pocket, pulling out a photo. It's from last Christmas. We were going to Photoshop you in like a fun joke. Then, it didn't feel right. The photo showed the family in matching pajamas around a tree I'd never seen. Where I should have been, there was a gap filled now with digital garland and a dog in a sweater. I pushed it back toward him. That's not a joke. That's a replacement. He nodded once, folding the photo in half. I'm sorry. The clock on the wall clicked louder than usual. He didn't move. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I don't offer it, I said. Not because I won't, just because I don't owe it. His eyes dropped to the envelope again. You mailed the key back. That hurt. It should, I said, but not more than sleeping beside a garage door for 3 winters. He took a step back. Can I at least call sometimes? You can, I said. What I do with the call is my choice. He turned to leave. The rain had slowed. As the door opened, a chime rang overhead, soft and flat. It reminded me of a bell Vanessa once hung by the kitchen window, one I was told not to touch because it was for aesthetics. When the shop was quiet again, I opened the drawer where I kept my own keys. 1. It unlocked the back door to my room above the store. It didn't fit anywhere else in the world, and I liked that. The house key I mailed wasn't heavy, but it had carried every apology that never came every birthday where I handed over cake, but no one looked at me when they blew out candles. Every time they said, "Let's keep this simple, Mom," and then erased me from the picture. I swept the floor slowly. A leaf had blown in earlier yellow and crinkled. I didn't throw it out. I set it near the potted ivy by the window where the sun might warm it a little longer. That night I made tea. Same chipped mug, same old burner. I paid the light bill 2 days ago. On time. I watered the ivy. I didn't speak aloud. But in the quiet, I repeated what I'd written on that card. I'm not coming back. And I didn't mean the garage. I meant the version of me who waited. I no longer rehearse explanations in my head. The kettle hissed as I folded the dish towel and hung it neatly over the handle of the oven. It didn't match anything else in the kitchen, and that's why I liked it. A small blue flower embroidered in the corner. I bought it from a church garage sale not because it was needed, but because I could. I hung my coat on the single brass hook behind the door, the same movement I once did in homes where I was only half welcome, but this time it stayed. On the windowsill, the glass jar of lavender had tipped slightly overnight. I straightened it, then tapped the side gently. A soft cloud of scent rose, settled. The world didn't tilt for my absence in other places. It settled, too. A white envelope had slid under my door. I recognized Doris's handwriting. She still used cursive loops that took their time crossing a page, as if she never rushed her thoughts. The card inside read, "Next meeting, the secret garden. I hope you'll come and share your thoughts. You always see what others miss." I placed it on the small table near the kettle. A corner of the invitation curled in the rising steam, but I didn't move it. It looked alive like that. There was no knock, no footsteps on the stairs, no voice through the door reminding me that it's better for everyone if we don't make things bigger than they are. No one was performing their tolerance of me. No one monitored the angle of my silence. At the shop, someone pointed to the bouquet I'd arranged last week. Who picked these? The man wore a suit, but spoke like he hadn't been listened to in days. I said I did. Just that. He nodded, then handed me a small note to add. "You were right about her," it read. I didn't ask who. I wrapped the stems carefully, let him linger. He left without speaking again. Some stories don't need both sides told. At the pharmacy, I signed my name with a pen that dragged slightly. The nurse behind the desk looked up. "You've got everything logged correctly." Most people miss the follow-up box. I didn't explain that I'd triple-checked the form, folded it at home, unfolded it again on the sidewalk to make sure I hadn't missed anything. I just nodded. She slid the prescription across the counter like a small reward for being prepared. The soup took longer than it should have. The beans weren't as soft as I remembered them being when I was 8, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table, watching the way she stirred with one hand and kept the other resting on her hip. She used a wooden spoon. Mine was metal, slightly bent at the handle. The smell filled the apartment quickly. I opened the window wider. No one complained. No voice from down the hallway reminding me that some scents don't go well with guests. No one gagging or waving a towel near a smoke detector. Just a gust of wind that moved a piece of paper on the floor. I left it there. The painting I finally hung above the reading chair was a little crooked. I stepped back, adjusted it once. It was a watercolor I'd painted at 22, before I knew what it meant to be edited in real life. A garden with too much yellow, not enough shade. But the light came from inside the house, glowing outward. I'd forgotten I'd imagined it that way. I made a note to buy frame hooks next week. The mug I chose had a chipped rim. I turned the crack away from my lips and held it with both hands. The tea wasn't too hot, and it didn't need sugar. I watched the condensation gather on the window. My reflection disappeared in the blur. I'd once overheard Vanessa at a brunch table whisper to her friend, "My mother means well. She's just not always in sync with the room." They laughed. I wiped my mouth with a paper napkin and said nothing. Garrett, on the other hand, always looked just past me. During conversations, during meals, during birthdays. "Mom, this is just how we do things now," he once said while signing paperwork I hadn't read. I'd nodded then, too. Now no one asked me to sign anything. I signed rent checks, medical forms, a book club attendance sheet. My name didn't look like permission anymore. It looked like identity. The hook by the door still only held my coat. I hadn't added a spare for anyone else, not out of bitterness, just because I didn't need to prepare for unannounced visits that never came. A small bowl on the kitchen counter held garlic and one orange. I remembered someone once told me that fruit in a kitchen made it feel staged, but I liked how the orange glowed in the fading light, how it seemed like a soft kind of punctuation. The radiator clicked. I adjusted the thermostat, not because it was cold, but because I could. Outside the tree in front of the building stood bare limbs tangled like thoughts left unsaid. I stood at the window longer than necessary, hand curled around the mug, steam warming my knuckles. There were no new voicemails, just a text from the pharmacy confirming next month's refill. No missed calls, no alarms. I sat at the table and wrote one sentence on a sticky note I have not been erased. I pressed it flat against the fridge door. Later, as I folded the throw blanket at the foot of my bed, I caught my own reflection in the mirror across the room. I didn't pause to assess or correct it. I didn't smile for approval. I looked like someone who had hung her coat boiled water and didn't apologize, and that was enough.